Hi, Janice. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, it's my pleasure, Pooja. I really appreciate the opportunity and look forward to us chatting together.
Yes, me too. I'm so excited to hear about your caregiving journey and how it led you to a self-care coach and kind of just everything that is involved in that process.
It is quite a process.
Can you start maybe sharing a little bit about your background and what initially drew you to a career in, I think it was special education? And then what inspired your transition from special ed to becoming a hands-on organizer and a productivity specialist?
Sure. It's funny because I don't ever remember a time when I didn't want to be a teacher when I was growing up. I don't know. I did have a younger sister, 4 years younger, so that could have been part of it. I do know that at one point my dad moved office buildings and he was able to bring home a large chalkboard, which we hung in my room and I would use to teach. I'm guessing I taught some stuffed animals in addition to my sister, but I think it just went from there and just I enjoyed learning. So I think that was a part of it as well. And somewhere along that journey, I decided I wanted to go into special education. Again, I don't quite remember all the particulars, but that was just really where my heart was at the time. And I did indeed teach. I have a master's in education and I taught for 11 years before burnout got to me. And then I transitioned actually briefly into the corporate world, 2.33 years. Like many other people, after 9/11, I was laid off. So that's how I know that it was 2.33 years, because that's what the paper said. And then I moved to North Carolina. I was at Maryland all that particular time. And I had a job, a corporate kind of job, and it and I were not a very good fit. And for me, honestly, I don't want to offend anyone, but for me, I heard it as a voice from God to start my own business, which sounded very odd to me since I knew nothing about running a business, but who was I to question? And I had known about the organizing industry for a while. And I figured that, looking into it more, I'm like, my background, my experiences, my training, and just the way I personally am wired lent itself to being able to do that. Not that it meant that like right away I was able to do stuff without learning more, because I immediately joined industry associations and started learning more. But I did already have a good foundation, which is why I got started with that. And that was 2002. And so it's now been 22 years. And since then, of course, lots has changed in our world, but also lots has changed with me. And of course, we've all done the COVID thing. So I'm getting older, like many people. So I knew that at some point I wouldn't be able to do the hands-on. And so it seemed like a natural thing, not only to go to virtual, and I am a certified organizer coach. So I have training in that. But because of my own personal experiences, as well as ones with my parents, as well as all the clients that I've had over the years, really going into this, what happens when someone gets a diagnosis? How does it impact your life? And not just the big things, because we all know the big things. It's like, oh, we have appointments, we have this. Mm-hmm. But it affects a lot of the little daily living things. And that was where I knew I could just pull, again, all my background and experience and learning and bring it to a place where I could help other people so that they didn't have to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, so you kind of started touching on this, but your organization productivity specialist background, along with your special ed teacher background, kind of led you into this more coaching journey for self-care, especially following a diagnosis and something like that, right? So can you describe the pivotal moment maybe during that caregiving journey? And if you want to share a little bit about what that journey looked like that significantly impacted you and to get to kind of exactly where you are today.
So I think the first one, because I think there were a couple, I think the first one for me was one Friday. I got a phone call, and it was my mom, and she said, I've fallen and I think I've broken my arm. I'm waiting for the ambulance. And, in that moment, I mean, my parents were still very, very vital then, and they both are still with us. But this was back in 2016, so over 8 years ago. And that was sort of when the whole, oh my goodness, I have my own diagnoses to deal with. I have clinical depression, which I, freely share, and I've had lots of surgeries. So I'm like, well, I have all of that, and I own a business, and I have other things going on. And now, obviously, my parents are going to need more, a little more support right away, like now. And I think that's really when I started learning from that very moment, even some of the things that now are really helpful. Just little things. My mom was, she would have been 76. And they were she severely broke her arm, and they were going to do it as outpatient surgery. I didn't know any better. They let her out at 7 p.m. at night, handed us a prescription, handed us, like 10 pages of directions, including the fact that we had to do drainage. And I'm like, well, it's a good thing I'm not queasy around blood. And so that, that to me was a really pivotal moment, because like after that, I learned to ask a lot of questions, and then I help my clients whenever they have something of that nature, learn how to ask questions. It was just quite an event, and still continues. I mean, even my more recent surgeries and their more recent surgeries, but also some other diagnoses, especially that have happened both to my parents and to clients that I work with. You have to advocate for yourself. And if you can't, like my parents, one of them, and my mom has Alzheimer's and my dad has significant dementia. So they really can't advocate for themselves at this point. And they're of the generation where you just do what the doctor said. And like you don't ask a whole lot of questions. And so, it's up to me and my sister to learn how to ask those questions. As far as their health is concerned, as far as our health, and then again, me empowering my clients.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's, I've worked in the industry as an occupational therapist long enough to see all of those kind of game time decisions that kind of happen, right? The game time questions that people don't know to ask, because you don't know what you don't know. And if you've never encountered it before, you really don't know what you should be asking for, or what you're looking for, right? And that's really why we do this work, right? It's really why we share our experiences and our journeys, and then try and help other people ask the right questions, make more informed decisions that best suit them and their needs. And so, you've touched on this a little bit, but what motivated you to become a self-management coach for individuals with new or changing diagnoses versus, I guess, let's say, existing diagnoses?
So I'm a natural born helper. Want to help people with things. I love to be able to use what I know and what I can learn, both from experiences as well as, book learning, as it were. And I saw this as a place that was not really being addressed. So if we look at like an example would be, a very like black and white example, since time itself is a pretty nebulous thing. So, if you think about, okay, you're got to go to a new doctor, which of course means you have paperwork to fill out in advance. And you probably want to take a copy with you so you have everything in case they lose it. So you've got that, like before an appointment, you have that piece of time to consider. You've got, during the appointment, and even if the doctor's running on time, you've got that time. And you have the driving to and from the doctor. And then depending on what happens in that appointment, you've got, labs or other tests or whatever. And people forget that it's not just, oh, the test is going to take an hour. It's also going to take 15 minutes to drive there and 15 minutes to drive back. And, oh, they want you there 15 minutes early. And, oh, wait a minute, you have to answer this questionnaire before you can go in. And you have to know all this information, which you may or may not already have in your head. So, you have to bring some information with you. And all of that together, again, that's my brain operates that way. A lot of people's doesn't, and that's fine. Everybody's brain is different. That's why we can all do different things. But I really saw it as okay, the population is aging. And I mean, overall, the population is aging. And so this is going to become more and more a situation where people are going to feel a little lost. And like you said, they don't know what they don't know, and they don't, which also includes not necessarily knowing where to go to get some help with it. So that really spoke to me to say, hey, wait a minute, this is a place where I can come in and help.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I mean, I think those with existing diagnoses, unfortunately, just pick up things along the way, right? If they've been dealing with it for a few years at a time, they kind of, the first time they probably stumbled a little, the second time they stumbled a little less, the third time now they have a bank of questions to ask and things to look forward to or, look at. And so, but it's really those people with newer diagnoses, specifically, I always talk about dementia, which is such a large umbrella term, right? And as I'm sure you've experienced with your dad and your mom, it's like, you get tested and then they tell you like, okay, yeah, they tested positive for Alzheimer's or they tested, they have dementia, goodbye. And it's like, okay, well, now what? It's a life altering situation. Now what? For the patient, for the family, for everybody involved, I think that's really hard. And so it's really important to have people like you and people like me and other people that are like coaches out there to really guide families through these situations. Now, having been a caregiver yourself, how does that experience shape how you approach your coaching clients, especially when they have a new diagnosis?
So, I think that it really helps that I understand at least partially what they're going through. I mean, everybody experiences stuff like this a little bit differently. So, I don't ever like to say I understand completely what you're going through. I may understand a lot, but I probably don't understand completely because, the diagnosis, even the same diagnosis can present a little differently. Family dynamics, health insurance and who you can go see, and that kind of like all of that presents differently. But I think the fact that I can understand, which they appreciate, is, sort of one piece to it. I think another piece to it is because I can, bring out the questions or the ideas or just sort of point to, a certain direction or just give them that idea of, this is not like, it feels different and it feels unusual and it doesn't necessarily even feel good, but you're not alone. Like other people, because I mean, in addition to the fact that obviously I can talk about my experience, but I can also mention without, I never tell clients about other clients. So, I'm never like, oh, and Jane Smith, who lives at 123 Any Street, you wouldn't believe what she did with this I don't do that. I do more of the, well, other clients who have this have found that, XYZ. So I think that helps as well to hear that there's a variety of experiences that people have.
Yeah, it's so important. I mean, it's not so. Yeah.
If I can, just a second to sort of go back almost a little bit earlier, one thing that I have found that a lot of people don't necessarily, again, yet realize, we'll say, is how some diagnoses will change and how that also puts a little kink in things. And so I'll give the example of, for example, a female who then is, in perimenopause and menopause, and how the hormone changes can throw off how her ADHD is, shows up in her life. It can also throw off, if she was using medication to monitor and manage things, it may throw that off and may have to look at other ones. So there's also okay, things have been going pretty well. I expect them to keep going pretty well. And then all of a sudden, whoops. And I think it's almost easier when you have a new diagnosis because, you sort of, I know what to do. I know, like, got to go to the doctor, got to do some research. It's a little bit harder when it's a diagnosis that you've had because, first of all, when you start to see changes, you don't even know what it is. And depending on the doctor, if you're with a specialist, an ADHD specialist in this particular case, they might recognize it sooner than, say, a general practitioner. So that, that's the other piece of how I help people navigate is just to ask the questions because I'm not a doctor. So I don't try to play one at all. I like to stay in my lane, but I will say things like, well, this is something that you may want to address with your, doctor or PA, depending on, what kind of practice they go to.
Yeah, it's so important to find specialty providers for certain diagnoses, right? Because like you mentioned, sometimes you don't realize that it's a symptom change and that it's not a completely new diagnosis or something that's happening. It could just purely be a new symptom emerging or a symptom changing and with the same diagnosis. And it could be changing due to a lot of different factors, stress, lifestyle, medication change, and then like you said, especially for women, hormonal changes, right, through the different stages of life. And so, yeah, it's really important to address that. I want to know what are some common challenges that your clients face when they receive a new diagnosis, and how do you help them overcome those challenges?
That's a great question. And I can answer it first with one word, and then I can give some extra words. So when people come to me, the word they usually start with is overwhelm. They feel overwhelmed. And, through discussions, I have found that overwhelm tends to reside in several areas. Number one is they're overwhelmed by information. And that can be different kinds of information. It can be, oh my goodness, I'm having to go through my insurance and figure out what's covered and who's covered and that kind of thing. So there's sort of that kind of information. And then there's information about, okay, well, the doctor said it could be A, B, or C. So now I got to find out more about that. It could be that information. It could be, oh, I know I'm going to have to take some time off. So now I have to figure out who I can contact to take over my job or whatever, sort of that kind of information. So lots of kinds of information that just starts the big swirl in the head. So that's sort of one piece. Another type of overwhelm is related to tasks because, again, all of the sudden new things are happening. And even if you don't, even if you only have a couple of doctor's appointments, you may find that, okay, well, that's fine. But now I'm finding that I'm, maybe there's some brain fog going on with whatever, I know that especially with chemo, that's common. So if someone is diagnosed with cancer and goes to chemo, the brain fog, not remembering, energy can often be impacted. So tasks that used to take a short period of time may take longer, which means you have to reduce the number of tasks that you're doing, and you can do that lots of different ways. That's a whole discussion. But just looking at, that part, because as adults, we have adulting to do. So we have, if we work, we have our job. If you don't work and you have children, then you still have a job. If you're also a caretaker, then you've got a third or fourth job, depending on how you're counting them. And so you've got all that going on, and we all still only have, 24 hours in a day to get things done, and sleep is still necessary. So, so we have to look at that piece. And then the third piece, and this makes it sound like they're distinct pieces, they're actually very interwoven, you've got the info, you've got the tasks, and you've got the time. Again, extra time you may need to do new things, go to doctors, go to appointments, have labs, etc. Which requires potentially driving, and especially depending again on health insurance, on where you live. If you're in a more rural area, it's probably going to take you longer to drive to and from. I know just last week, I took my mom to the cardiologist, and people checking in after us. We're very fortunate. We're in the Raleigh-Durham area, so she goes to doctors down at Duke University, and Duke pulls in people from all over. So one person came in and they're like, we just drove 2 hours to get here. And they were told, actually, well, you don't have an appointment. And she's like, yes, we do. It's in Duke My Chart. It got resolved, but it's the kind of thing where, can you imagine driving 2 hours only to be told you don't have an appointment and you're going to just drive 2 hours back? That's a lot of time and frustration.
Yeah.
So those tend to be the three areas that we start to address first.
I think that leads into kind of my next question, which, in your experience, what are the key components of effective self-management, especially with someone with a new diagnosis?
So this is where a lot of times people expect me to start spouting off tips and tricks and hints. And I like to actually back that up a little bit. And the first place to start is to breathe. And I realize that we all breathe, and we all breathe, on a regular basis. But I'm talking more in terms of more intentional, you might call it belly breathing for people that practice mindfulness or meditation. They have various ways they're taught to breathe. So just having that, you can even call it like a way to anchor or ground yourself. And that can also include other things, but the breathing is one of the quickest ways that people only need a little bit of instruction in. So if I can give them here's something you can do quick and easy, I can teach them several different breathing techniques. Now, as far as grounding in general, there are lots of other things. There's writing, there's reading. But I'm like, if we don't want to look at bringing new things on necessarily, we can look at the fact that if you're frustrated, you can take 3 slow, deep breaths. It's not going to impact the day greatly, but it will help you greatly. So that's one of the places that I just think is really, really important. Another place, it's so funny because my brain is just going, oh, you could do this, and you could do, just like everything else. I really like to work with my clients on identifying what their values are, which again, people are like, really? They have all of this stuff going on. Why would you do that? Because once someone knows their values, and it's not like it takes weeks or anything, we can get that done in an hour or less, then it really helps as you're prioritizing other tasks and other ways you're going to use your time. Because a lot of times we just do things because we've always done them, or we do them in the way we're doing them because that's the way we've always done them. And when you can look and say, okay, but one of my values is spending time with friends, then it may be, okay, well, right now I need some more time with friends because I need more support. And so therefore, this other thing that I have to do, I'm going to find somebody else to do that. I'm going to delegate that because, being with friends is a high value. So that's one reason why I do that, because we can sort of tie everything back to what's really, really important to them. It's actually a great technique to use whether or not going through a medical diagnosis, but it's especially helpful for that because, again, I won't say it's concrete because identifying values isn't a, black and white kind of thing, but it does bring everything back to, sort of, okay, well, you told me this before. So if that is still true, I'll just keep using the friends one. If spending time with friends is still true, then what does that mean as far as XYZ? How do you look at those in that particular way? And then the third one, just because of the information piece and our society, the third one is that I would say is to define what enough information is. We all know that you can find everything and more on the internet. Most people will agree that not everything on the internet is true. So always something important to keep in mind. But you can go down rabbit holes and find stuff about diagnosis and treatments. You could be there forever. So the first thing I try to talk with my clients about is figuring out, okay, what does enough look like? What does enough information or enough information for now? I try to encourage that they keep to just a few sources to start with. Usually I'll suggest something like Cleveland Clinic, Mayo Clinic, Johns Hopkins, one of those that you get a variety, of a variety of information about. And then I'll suggest the Foundation Association for whatever they have, because there's an association for everything. ADHD, obviously, Sjogren's. A lot of people may not even know what that is, but there is indeed a Sjogren's Association. There's one for, and I know this because I just interviewed with them, for ocular melanoma. So those associations, again, are the ones that are going to have the latest and greatest information, going to know where you can get support and stuff like that. So that's one way to figure out what enough is just to check with X number of sources, or to spend an amount of time. So I'm only going to spend an hour researching this, or an hour for now, depending on where you are and things. But really figuring that out, because otherwise, not only does it take a lot of time, just time to research and learn more, but there's also then the brain time that it takes afterwards, when your brain is going, but how about this? And how about that? And they suggest this and they suggest that, and I could do this. And then, it's just enough to drive you crazy. So those are sort of the three, beyond the, okay, when we're looking at task management, what can we do? Those three really help overall with everything that is to come.
Yeah, I really liked your piece on delegation. I think not enough people have delegation skills. It's a skill for sure. And I see it, every day in my house. I'm a type A delegator. If I don't want to do something, I get someone else to do it. At work, in my personal life, it's kind of, I try to save my energy, right? I try to spend my energy where I want to spend it. And I think it's a skill. It's a skill that you either are born with, which is rare, I think. But I think a lot of times it's a skill that you pick up over the years if you are someone who takes a lot on, right? If you're someone who constantly said yes to everything and had to learn, probably not in a great way, how to delegate, right? And then you eventually learn how to say no after saying yes so many times and picking up all these things, and then learning what you can and cannot delegate, right? So I think that might be part of your answer for what I'm about to ask you. But how do you help clients balance their personal and professional lives after receiving a new diagnosis? Because I imagine that that's a key concern for a lot of people.
It absolutely is. And it pulls together some of what I already mentioned in terms of, figuring out values and stuff like that. I also, we have to evaluate what stage they're in their personal life. Are they, married and have young kids, married and have, but empty nesters, not married and have no kids, where are they in that particular? Because that obviously will dictate a little bit of how they're going to balance things. It's going to be tougher if you've got a couple of young kids or teenagers. Actually, I'm not sure which would be more difficult, would be kids or teenagers. So we look at that particular piece. And then the professional piece as well, because again, depending on the ages, someone might be working part-time, they might be working full-time, they might, be working for someone, they might have their own business. So we have to look at all that. And then we can look at what some of the options are on both of those sides, both the personal and the professional. So if I look at the personal side, we can look at, okay, are there things that you are currently volunteering for, in a classroom, with a church, whatever. Okay, how quick can you get out of those? If they're willing to, some are not. And, that's a different sort of discussion. But we can look at basically what kinds of things can we delete altogether. We do, as you were sort of referencing just a minute ago, learning boundaries, learning how to say no is definitely a skill that I work with them on. So in addition to maybe deleting some of the things that really can go and it's not a major crisis for them to go, is that idea of, okay, and you can't say yes to something new. Like just because you've now said no to this and it looks like you have this time freed up in your schedule or this energy freed up does not mean that you get to say yes to something else. Not right now. Other times in life that may be true, but not today. And at the same time, I also remind them that this isn't necessarily a permanent thing. So if there's something that they really enjoy volunteering with, we'll say that they volunteer at a homeless shelter or whatever. We're not saying they can't ever do that again. We're just saying that right now, the time and energy for that needs to be focused elsewhere. So that's one piece of it. The work side can be the same way. If you are working for someone and you're full-time, you can look at, is it possible to go part-time or 3/4 time, whatever. Are there, responsibilities that there is someone else there that can take them? So you've got that piece. For some people, they can, again, depending on the age, they may look at the possibility of fully or partially retiring. So that can be another piece to it. And then that delegation piece. And I do work with clients on how to do that because it is, like you said, it's a skill. You can learn how to delegate. And there are steps to be learned in order to be able to delegate. And some of it too is figuring out who you can delegate to. And when we don't like delegating, especially those of us that like to have total control and don't want other people doing it because they're not going to do it the way we want it done. When you get past that little part, there's still the part of who's going to do it. And we often just, again, we think small when in effect, there is a lot more out there. Now, some of it is related to availability of money, grant you that. But, there are personal concierge services. There are people who run errands for most anything. There are people who can drive either the children somewhere or they can drive you somewhere to a doctor's appointment or whatever. Obviously, there are house cleaners. And it's funny because I delegate the house cleaning, the lawn mowing, I delegate anything having to do with fixing something. And a lot of people, they already delegate some of that type of stuff, but it's frightening to think of delegating other things when, it can be a good thing. I had for a number of years, and I'm sure that I will again, I had a personal chef. She would come in, she'd cook for the whole day. I'd have all these meals. They'd be in the freezer. I could take them out as I needed. It was lovely. But it doesn't have to be permanent. Again, that could be okay, we need some meals. Most personal chefs are very, are very good about finding what people can and can't eat, whether it is an interest thing or a dietary thing. So it could just be that for a while you do that. Or maybe you've got a lot of friends and they're willing to sign up to bring meals. So just a few examples.
Yeah, absolutely. You see meal trains all the time, right? When someone's having a baby or has a family member pass away, there's always meal trains that come up in the community. That's a nice form of delegation if you have the support available, right? But if you don't, then yeah, like you said, you can go the private route. There's also the public sector, right? There are resources available in the community through local departments for disabilities, for aging, for seniors who need assistance. And I think it's really important, resource navigation is a big part of what I do. And that is really understanding what options are available in your own community so that you know where you could potentially delegate some of that stuff to every day, right?
Right.
I imagine there's a lot of emotions at play here, right? Especially when you're asking somebody to start removing things from their life. And I guess as a coach, I know, you mentioned you're obviously not a doctor, and there's fine lines a lot of times probably between people wanting to seek professional healthcare professions, right, versus coaching. But what role does emotional support play in your coaching, and how do you provide this to your clients?
So definitely, emotions are a big thing. Oftentimes I have clients that will cry. I'll also have clients that get really mad, not necessarily at me, but just at a situation. And I am not a counselor, not a therapist. But I do, in addition to being a coach, I also have a background in psychology. My undergrad degree was in psychology. So I have a little bit more knowledge than some people might. But again, I don't practice to be a therapist. So I want to make sure, again, that I don't cross that line because or even a licensed social worker. I'm not one of those either, which I know they can also do some counseling. So I hold space for them is one thing. Like, that sounds strange to a lot of people, but for some of my clients, they need to not even necessarily vent. They just need to think out loud. They need to ask questions that they don't even necessarily want an answer to. I find a lot of my clients are, like I am, a verbal processor. So for me, often if I'm caught in something, if I say it out loud, it makes things clearer to me. And so sometimes I can say it out loud just to myself and figure things out. Sometimes I want to say it to somebody. I don't even necessarily want their opinion or suggestion. Sometimes I do, but sometimes I just want to hear them go, I understand. And so sometimes that's what I'm doing. I'm still obviously, I have the information or I'm writing down the information so that I can ask for clarification later or bring up something. But sometimes it's just that I'm here and it is okay to talk about it. So the emotions are coming out that way. Another thing is I am also a resource queen. So, I try to look for what else is available. You mentioned a couple of things, that's also where finding associations can be really helpful, like the National Alliance of Mental Illness, the ADHD groups, like, when it comes to dementia and Alzheimer's, they've got not only the groups for the people that have it, but they have the groups for the caregivers. And so, being able to point in a direction of if you need more, if you want more, if you just want to meet some new people that are in this particular life situation, here are some other places to go. Because I can't, it's just not practical for me to be able to, always be available. I'm a service provider and I have hours and I have ways people can contact me and, I can sometimes take some sort of last minute appointments, but at the same time, I go to bed early and I don't respond to a text at 11 p.m. That's one of my boundaries. I don't respond to text actually after 7 p.m. when it comes to my business. So, but I, want to find places where they can go to get that support, be it emotional or other.
Yeah, that's really important. You mentioned a lot of different diagnoses, and I imagine you see a plethora of different types of diagnoses, different stages, different levels of care needs. How do you stay updated on best practices and new information related to self-management or even the chronic disease that you might be working with? And then how do you tailor your coaching strategies based on that to fit the unique needs of your clients?
So I am both a certified organizer coach and a certified professional organizer in chronic disorganization. And both of those credentials require me to get recertified every 3 years. I should say each of them, because they're not, sometimes I have some things that can be used for both, but, two different things to submit. So that's part of it, is they have very specific in terms of, the kind of things that I need to learn about, how I need to learn them, what I need to do. Part of my coaching recredentialing is actually, working in a small group situation with other coaches, as well as working one-on-one with a mentor coach. So I've got that particular piece. I do belong to the Institute for Challenging Disorganization, we have webinars every week on a variety of topics. So I have those that I can listen to, and you don't only have to listen live these days like you did when I first started. These days you can listen to the recording. So, I've got that. There's so many. I would never be able to even keep up with everything that I'm interested in, because I'm interested in pretty much all of it. So one of the things that really helps me is that I have good systems for, marking websites, keeping track of articles, because I don't print them out, and things like that, and have them by different topics. Because then, since I'm not going to remember everything in my head, I can know where to look for things. I am also part on Facebook. I'm in a couple of groups. So one group is one for anxiety and depression in women. And so sometimes someone will bring up something new, and I'll be like, oh, I haven't heard about that as an option. Let me go research that. And, if there came a point where I'm completely flummoxed, I have no idea, then I would go to either colleagues, or I would start checking on the internet. Again, the reliable sources. And then I will point out, to them that here are some other places. You can go ask your doctor about this, or you can go do this. So point them in some of those other places. But I try to stay up as much as possible on what's new, as well as what's new in terms of like brand new diagnoses, as well as what's happening within a diagnosis. These days, I just know from watching TV that probably at least once a week I hear about something that I haven't heard of before. It usually involves letters. They tell you what they stand for, but then they'll go, that's a really rare disease. And I'm thinking, okay, I might be interested in finding out more, but I can't research every rare disease. I will wait until I have a client with that before I delve into that. But I have to back myself away. I have to give myself boundaries on how much time I'm allowed to do research, because I just love learning. As far as tailoring to clients, part of my training, whether it be when I was doing hands-on organizing and productivity or as a coach, is about individualizing. And finding out. I've done a lot with people who are neurodiverse, and learning that particular piece. I'm very interested in like personality tests and stuff like that. So you've got sort of that, how a person is and presents, and so for me, it's like, yes, we have some, everybody has basic things. Like we have to find some goals, and we're heading towards those goals. But if I had 3 clients that all had the exact same diagnoses and the exact same goals, it would still look a little bit different for each of them how we get there, because each of them is different. And so, I learn over time. I do have people do a pretty thorough intake, so that gives me some information, because part of that is asking some questions like, how do you best learn? Or, if one of them is like, if I don't hear back from you, what should I do? For me to be able to go, wait a minute, haven't heard in a while. So I've got some of those kinds of questions, which help me too, to be able to individualize. But everybody to me, I try to be very present for the person in the moment and keep, just focus on, here's this person, this is what I know about them, this is what has worked in the past, this is what has not worked, or I'll ask clarifying questions. It'll be like, okay, what have you done? We'll just take like a to-do list. What kind of to-do list format have you used in the past? And has it been useful, or has part of it been useful? Okay, well, let's take that information and then bring in some new parts that'll make it even more successful.
I've picked up on so much of the little nuanced details that you've shared, and I'd love to hear more, of a success story. Can you share a success story from your work as a coach that stands out to you?
Sure. I have several. Well, I'll start with one and we can see how much time is left. So I have a client where it was actually a therapist who contacted me and was trying to find out if I had services that could help her patient. The person was diagnosed with ADHD and with anxiety, specifically some social anxiety, and possibly a little OCD in there as well. And her house had, we'll just say, extra stuff in it. And, it had gotten to the point where she didn't want it to be that way anymore. But between the ADHD and the social anxiety, and the anxiety, not even just social anxiety, she was sort of stalled out on what to do. So, the therapist asked me some, just sort of highline questions of what I do, how I do. And then she took that information to the client, and the client was like, oh, okay, this is good. I'll talk to her. So we talked, and this was literally right before COVID. Like, our first appointment was supposed to be right when they were shutting down everything down. And she's like, I can't meet. I have to go into work. But what we did over time, and it was virtual, is she worked through all of her rooms and was able to delete things. And when I say delete from a space, I'm talking, it might be that you're consigning it or that you're donating it. It doesn't matter, whatever. It's leaving the space. So I just use the word delete. It's a great general word for things that are leaving the space. So we worked on that. And one of the things we did is I did the values with her pretty early on. And that was really helpful because that's when I found out she really did want to be able to have friends over. And so that was part of the motivation that we could use when it was, I said I would do this between last appointment and this appointment. I didn't do it. But I could go back to, okay, well, let's explore everything from, when do you think you'd like to have people over? Okay, well, then we have to sort of look at what needs to be done for you to be comfortable with that, as well as what can get you motivated to work on a little bit of this every day. So we worked on that, but I did also, because she wanted to do some upgrades and changes and get some things fixed. And it was the kind of thing where she couldn't get some of the things fixed because there was stuff blocking the space. So the people that would have fixed it couldn't get to the actual thing that needed to be fixed. So we worked on not only that access, but the steps of getting the person, finding the person, talking to them, making the appointment. And so again, we talked through that. I provided, accountability. I provided encouragement. Because that's, that a large part of what I do is both of those things. A lot of my clients, we text or email or something like that every day or so, just to sort of, if they want it. Again, not everybody wants it, and that's fine. But some people want me to say, specifically, did you do X? Other people just want me to say, just checking to see how you're doing today. So that part depends. But this particular client, she didn't always respond. But she always told me that she appreciated it even when she didn't respond. And so she has been able to have people over, including her parents who had not gone into her place in quite a while. And she has been able to find things that she was not finding before. She has deleted a lot of things, and that makes her happy because it gives her the space to be able to keep what she wants and where she wants it. So that is really, she was at the place where she was ready to make a change. And I'm not saying that it was always easy, because it's not always easy. Sometimes it's 3 steps forward and 2 steps back, or 3 steps forward and 1 step back. And we did have, we had the distractibility of the ADHD, and we had some of the anxiety of, am I doing this right? Am I making the right decision? But overall, we got to where she wanted to be. And I still check in periodically, because every once in a while someone needs a little maintenance piece of, wait a minute, things have gone backwards a little bit. But overall, it was a really encouraging and fun. I have fun with my clients. So
thanks for sharing. I think when we first talked, you shared a story with me about someone with celiac disease and dietary restrictions, and how you assisted those clients with meal planning and pantry reorganization to kind of help with improve their day-to-day. And I think our audience would love to hear that story as well, if you'd like to share.
Sure, absolutely. So someone who was diagnosed with celiac in her 40s. And at this point, although she did have several children that were out of the house, she still had several that were in the house. And, one of the first decisions becomes, okay, is everybody going to eat gluten-free? Or, are we going to do a 2-meal thing where, we have the gluten-free stuff for her and things with gluten for everybody else? So we sort of go through a series of questions of that nature, because the answers then inform what happens next. So, you have okay, this is what's going to happen at mealtime. Then how about snacks? Even if everybody eats gluten-free at meals, there's still snack time. So can the people that don't have celiac disease, can they have like regular snacks? Okay. So then we need to figure out in the pantry and in the cupboards how things are going to be divided. Are we going to have, okay, these 2 shelves are for, everything that has gluten and the rest of them don't, or what? And the refrigerator too. Can't forget the refrigerator. And in this case, you have to sort of get everybody else on board to do this. So that's another piece to it. So you've got that as far as the organization of the pantry and the cupboards and the kitchen, basically. Then you also have okay, now we've got to learn some new recipes. So we have to find those. And again, that's where the whole, okay, it's going to take some time to find. And even if you go, okay, well, I'm guessing, I don't know for sure, but I'm guessing that somewhere out there's a whole website that just has gluten-free recipes. Okay, that's great, but you still have to find ones that have ingredients that your family likes. If they don't like bananas, like I hate bananas, don't make me anything but gluten-free, all the gluten in the world. I don't want any bananas. So, you have to still find recipes that appeal. And then you have to figure out, okay, where can I go shopping for this? And oftentimes people have to experiment with a recipe. Maybe the first recipe for banana bread didn't work, but they really like banana bread, so they want to try a different recipe. And so just taking all of those things into account, so that something as seemingly simple as, okay, every day we have to eat some meals, we have to get some snacks, trying to make it so that it'll never be quite like it was before. It will be different, but that doesn't make it bad. It just means things are different now. And because oftentimes people don't think through all of that, they get flustered because of extra time, and they get frustrated because they're not, they feel like they're always eating the same thing, or they can't find the ingredients they want because they aren't sure which store to go to. So that's also part of what I helped that client and others with as well.
That example resonates with me so much because, what is the most common substitute for gluten or wheat-based products? Do you know?
I don't know. Or if I do, I don't remember.
It's usually something that's like almond flour based, right? They'll usually substitute it with something that's almond based. Same thing
that would have been my guess.
Dairy. Yeah. Same thing for dairy, right? Non-dairy products are generally substituted with almond milk. I have a nut allergy and I'm allergic to almonds. So I had to really figure out how I can stay dairy-free and gluten-free and nut-free, right? And luckily it's just me and my husband. So I have it fairly easy compared to maybe some other people who have a harder time with kids involved too, right? But I can just imagine where, if you have that many people who need to be fed every day and you're the only one with all of these restrictions to try and figure out, okay, well, I can't have this and I can't have this and I can't have this. And where do I find things that will taste good and that my husband will eat because, he doesn't have to eat this, but I'm not making 2 meals because I don't have the time to make 2 meals, right? And so I can totally see where it would be super helpful for someone else to kind of just be like, hey, I found all this information. Here it is. You can find what works for you and kind of run with it, right?
Well, and knowing that that's the thing. It's like there are personal chefs that will cook gluten-free. So it could be that you do that, splurge on that, once every couple of months or whatever. I have no doubt that there are all sorts of support groups, both online and in person. So again, finding that, checking things out so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Because who has time for that? Nobody.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So Janice, this has been a wonderful conversation and I've loved learning about what you do and how you help different clients. What is one takeaway you'd like the audience to consider as it relates to self-management for chronic diseases, especially for themselves, but also especially as a family caregiver?
So I think the one thing that people need to remember, and I will tell you that as I say this out loud, I'm also saying it to myself, is some of the self-care piece. You have to take care of yourself with just the basic things. I mean, just things like sleep, like adequate hydration, things of that nature, that it's so easy to give up. I mean, what do a lot of people, when they get really busy, what do they give up? They give up sleep. They go to bed later. They try to cram more things in, or they forget to drink water. There are some people that forget to eat. I still haven't quite figured that out. I'd like to figure that out, but I haven't figured that out. But the hydration piece, now that I have, because I have an app for that. But just some of those basics. And, for the person who has the diagnosis, and if you're a caregiver, making sure that whoever you're helping is looking at that stuff as well, in terms of the basics of sleep, hydration, eating, and that kind of stuff. So I know it sounds like, oh, everybody knows that. They do, but sometimes they forget, or sometimes they need permission. Like, I'm really strict about bed and sleeping, but that's because I don't want people to have to be around me if I don't get adequate sleep. It's not pretty. But I know for anybody, having adequate rest helps with everything else. And not having it hampers a lot of other things. So just that really is important. A lot of other things may be important, but those basics of sleep and hydration and food, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again so much, Janice, for taking the time and sharing everything you know and do with us.